Without further ado, let me introduce David Bray, the CIO of the FCC, and a very interesting guy beyond that.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
All right.
So I recognize right after lunch that your serotonin levels are going up. You're probably a little bit sleepy after having your meal. So my job is to give you a dose of exponential espresso over the next 19 minutes on charting cyber Terra Incognita. Now, first, however, before we jump into that whole Terra Incognita question, anybody know what this is a photo of? I'll give you a hint. It's a pale blue dot. I heard. It's not Pluto. It's actually us. This is actually us 3.7 billion miles away. This is the planet Earth. And it was taken in 1990 when Voyager 1 turned around. And it took 5.5 hours for sunlight to be reflected from our planet to make that image, and another 5.5 hours for radio waves to be sent back to reconstruct that image. Now, I want to sort of take you on a real quick journey about how rapidly our world has changed since Voyager 1 launched, since it took that photo, to where we are today. So Voyager 1 launched in 1977. There were 4.2 billion human beings on the face of the planet, and for those of you who remember, the Apple II went on sale with a whopping 4 kilobytes of RAM at that time, which could probably play about maybe the first 1 or 2 seconds of an MP3 file nowadays. By the time Voyager 1 had actually traveled that 3.7 billion miles in 1990, there are now about 5.3 billion human beings on the face of the planet. GDP has tripled. We're now looking at Windows 3.0 being released by a company called Microsoft. And most importantly, December of 1990, a young Tim Berners-Lee turns on the first web server ever at CERN. Now, any guesses at how many web servers, just web servers, are on the face of the planet nowadays? They're here 10 million? 100 million? Come on now. 1 billion is exactly right. There are more than 1 billion web servers on the face of the planet nowadays, and the last 150 million came online in the last 2 years. This is not linear change, this is exponential change, and that's what I'm hopefully trying to illustrate to you, is our world is changing rapidly. So 2013, I'm going to pause there, because this is a year that we made history, and probably most of us don't even know it. 2013, there were 7.1 billion human beings on the face of the planet, and 7 billion network devices. We reached parity. Now, obviously, they're not equitably distributed. Some of us have more than 1 or 2 network devices, probably multiples of 10s or more. But that was an interesting tipping point. At the same time, GDP tripled yet again. And there's 4 zettabytes, 4 billion terabytes of data on the face of the planet. To give you a sense of scale, the Library of Congress is 10 terabytes. So in 2013, there were 400 million versions of the Library of Congress on the face of the planet. And that's going to double every 2 years as well. So let's look just 6 years ahead to 2022, less than 6 years away from now, anywhere between 75 and 300 billion network devices on the face of the planet. If we don't think this train called the Internet of Things, this train called cybersecurity, aren't going to collide, they are going to collide, and they're going to have huge ramifications for where we're going to go. Also, we will go up from having about a little bit less than 3 billion human beings having access to the internet right now to 7 billion human beings having access to the internet in less than 6 years, out of the 8 billion people on the face of the planet. And we'll be at 96 zettabytes, 9.6 billion versions of the Library of Congress on the face of the planet. Google search will no longer work with keywords because we don't go past the first or second pages of search results. If it hasn't happened already, things will happen where we could have avoided a bad thing, or we could have capitalized on a significant opportunity if we had only pieced together A plus B plus C, but we're literally drowning in data that we've created, and as a result, we'll miss out on those opportunities. This exponentially changing world will strain both the private sector and the public sector alike, and it's going to have huge implications for the trust that people have in their institutions. Already, we're seeing trust in institutions wane. So, I right now serve as a senior executive and the chief information officer at the Federal Communications Commission. However, I like to put forward to you that government is an outdated 20th century term. In fact, what we need to be talking instead about is public service, which is what we, the people, choose to do together that we cannot do alone. And it really gets to the importance of you. How many of you have a smartphone? All right, a significant percentage, as I expected. How many of you, if you knew that the data you provided was anonymous and kept private, would be willing to share data from your smartphone on maybe air quality, or water quality, or transportation quality, or energy efficiency, if it would make your local communities healthier, safer, and better to live in? So again, and you don't have to if you don't want to. But recognize that what you're carrying in your pocket, according to some, has more computing power than President Reagan had available to him through the Pentagon in 1981. And that the next 1 billion people on the face of the planet that are going to get a smartphone are going to probably get it for less than $50. So you're carrying around a multi-int platform in your pocket. The question is, how can we make sure when we take our processes that we used to do in government and transform them to being used in the cloud, we're not just carrying them over exactly as the processes we're used to doing. At the FCC, when I arrived, we actually decided to do a little experiment. There had been 9 CIOs in 8 years, which is always a good sign for CIO number 10. That's usually a sign that everything's going well. And then 2, we were paying about $4 or $5 million a year, thereabouts, to actually test broadband connection speeds around the nation. This was almost like the Nielsen ratings to see if the ISPs were really giving you the broadband speed that they promised you. Were you getting that 50 megabits or not? But we decided we wanted to crowdsource this and make this as an app that would be freely available for you to download. And if you want to, test your broadband connection speed. And if you want to, then share that with the FCC. But if you remember the events of 2013, you can imagine someone saying, "Hi, I'm with the government. Would you like to download this app to your phone that will monitor your broadband connection?" Probably not going to be that successful. But what we did was we made it open source. The terms and conditions were only 2 pages long. When was the last time you ever downloaded anything from the internet that had the terms and conditions that was only 2 pages long? But on top of it, people could look at the code. It was posted on GitHub, and they could see that we were not collecting your IP address. They could see that we did privacy by design. We didn't know who you were in a 5-mile radius. And as a result, it was the 4th most downloaded app for a while, right behind Google Chrome. That shows people are hungry to get involved with public service if you give them opportunities. You think about what happened about a month and a half ago in New York, where they were looking for a suspect. That was a case of surveillance. We essentially crowdsourced trying to find a suspect. I would submit to you that things we do right now that are done by government professionals don't have to be. They can be involving the public and involving the private sector in addition to government. And I want you to really think about it in terms of cybersecurity, because I think up until now, it's been seen as a burden that's only done by government, maybe working with the private sector, but a burden only carried by government for the nation. What we're facing is what I would call Terra Incognita, cyber Terra Incognita in particular, because the complexity of all the legacy infrastructures that we have, plus the addition of more and more additional new things with the Internet of Everything, machine learning. DARPA had a competition in the last 6 months to see if it was a case where the hackers versus the machine, who would be better at playing defender. And this was the first time they did it. But the machine came in 3rd place. If you remember the initial autonomous vehicles that DARPA did, they could barely get past their first 100 feet. But within 4 years, we did have autonomous cars. I think that AI is not going to replace humans, but it's going to augment humans. And the question is, how can we both work together? But I would submit to you that when you add all these things together, plus human actors, it's near impossible to know all the vulnerabilities. In fact, I would say if you want something to be 100% secure, unplug it from the internet, bury it underground, and make sure no human being ever touches it. What we really need to be talking about is cyber resiliency. Now, it's worth thinking about the average internet minute. So the good side of the average internet minute, according to statistics, there's more than 204 million pieces of email sent within a minute globally, 4 million Google searches, 2.4 million pieces of Facebook content posted, 72 hours of YouTube video uploaded within a minute, and upwards of 48,000 iOS apps downloaded. Now, actually, it's worth pausing because that 72-hour statistic, that was last year. Guess how many hours of YouTube video are uploaded in a minute now, just 1 year later? Double? What if I told you upwards of 500 hours in a minute? This is not even doubling. This is now, we're looking at geometric increases. And this is, again, how are we going to make sense of that video? Sure, some of it's probably cat videos and we can ignore it. But what if something's ISIL or something that we need to make sense of? How can we actually pay attention to this in this growing exponential amount of data? Now, there's the flip side of the average internet minute as well. According to McAfee, they see 200 new threat vectors per minute. FireEye says new piece of advanced persistent threat malware. something that can actually be polymorphic. They see a new one every 3 minutes. DOE says they see upwards of 7,000 attacks in a minute. DOD, 85% of the emails they receive in that minute are nefarious and have a bad attachment to it. And these two will double and grow exponentially in the years ahead. So this is the internet that we've created. It has both a good side and a bad side. I always like to put forward that technology is amoral. It's how we humans choose how to use it that determines whether it's good or bad. Now, I had the opportunity in February and March of last year to be what's called an Eisenhower Fellow, sent to both Taiwan and Australia to meet with their industry, as well as their ministers of defense, communications, and justice, to have a conversation about how they were going to get ready in February of 2015 for the Internet of Everything. And as you can imagine, most countries were just beginning to think about that they need to have national strategies, but the number one question I was asked both in Taiwan and Australia is if your mother's refrigerator or your father's toaster oven is now connected to the internet and is involved with a DDoS attack on a bank or on a hospital, who's going to notify them? It's probably not .mil, it's probably not the military because they're probably busy doing other things. It's probably not even law enforcement because, again, that's something that's outside our domain. I would put forward, and I recognize I'm a bit biased, I come from the background that involved bioterrorism preparedness. I think we need to have something akin to cyber public health. We need to think of these things as herd behaviors that are occurring with the Internet of Things. We can characterize what's normal behavior, and when something is actually doing something that's abnormal, perhaps we quarantine it, take it offline until we can figure out is this a hardware issue, a software issue, or if someone's trying to exploit it. And then once we've characterized it, make it better and release it back onto the internet. Right now, the ways that we are dealing with cybersecurity will not scale when we go from right now having 14 billion devices on the face of the planet to upwards of 75 billion in less than 6 years. So, a little bit about my background. In 2000, I joined what was called the Bioterrorism Preparedness Response Program at the CDC. We were only 30 people, and we were there because the sarin gas attacks had happened in Japan in the 1990s, and we could not find all the vials of smallpox that unfortunately some of the former Soviet republics had stockpiled. And I was actually supposed to brief the CIA and the FBI on September 11th, 2001, at 9 o'clock in the morning as to what we would do if a bioterrorism event happened. Of course, 8:34, the world changed. We literally piled computers into cars to set up an underground bunker and then fly and deal with the response to New York and DC. Didn't sleep for 3 weeks, stood down on October 1st, briefed the CIA on October 3rd, and the first case of anthrax shows up 24 hours later. Infectious diseases don't stop at borders, and they involve all of the community. It cannot be done just by government. It cannot be done just by industry. And so I would submit we need to do the same thing when it comes to cyber, because really, if you really think about it, what cyber is a trend in which people are getting capabilities that only nation states had 30 or 40 years ago. And how we solve cyber will prepare for this increasing super empowering of people with capabilities. Not to make you even more worried, but bio is going to be the next cyber. I've seen in Taiwan for less than $1 million, you can do personalized medicine, personalized E. coli tailored to just your DNA for less than $1 million. Now we play out Moore's Law, in 10 years that's probably going to be $100. But we need to recognize that personalized medicine is also personalized poison that can make all of us okay and only affect you. So everything you're seeing in cyber, you will see in bio in the next 10 years. So the challenges for nations and the world alike is how do we have solutions that are scalable to address with the fact that really what we're doing is super empowering people to do things that nation states could only do 30 years ago. As I already mentioned, we need to get ready for machine learning assistance. Again, it's not to replace humans, but to augment their capabilities. Humans have to go home at night. They have to sleep. They have to be with their families. And so really it's about having them both work together. We've already done this with medicine, where medicine right now, 99% of a machine can be better than any doctor in the world. If you're actually going to a hospital, unless it's the best hospital in the world and you want to have a diagnosis for whether or not you have cancer or not, you want the AI involved because it's going to be better than 99% of doctors. But at the same time, I want to put forward and say AI is just like a 5-year-old. When we interact with a 5-year-old, we don't teach them subject, verb, object. We just expose them to enough language, and eventually they say, to school today I'm going to run, or something like that. But when you ask them why they said it that way versus other ways, like maybe school runs day, something like that, that doesn't make sense, they'll tell you it's just because they never heard it said that way before. The same thing's true with cyber. Cyber, we can use machine learning to tell us what's normal and what's not normal, and characterize the abnormal as well as the normal, but it cannot replace the questions of why, which will still require humans. And so really it's about augmented teams. I'd love to actually start seeing competitions where both AIs and humans aren't against each other, but are collectively on both a defender and an offending team together. Just to give you a sense of the scale of the change that we are facing, if you take all the numbers associated with Internet Protocol version 4, which, as you know, we ran out of these numbers about a year ago. We're now dealing with Internet Protocol version 6. But that's 2 to the 32 numbers. That's 4.3 billion Internet addresses. And you put them in a beach ball. Any guesses as to how big Internet Protocol version 6, which we're doing now, is in comparison? I'll give you a hint. We're going from 2 to the 32 to 2 to the 128th. We are going from the internet being known as a beach ball to the internet being the size of the sun. Again, if we don't think this is going to break all the paradigms that we are used to in trying to do cybersecurity, it will. And we can't continue to rely just on humans, because if we couldn't, as humans, manage to defend the beach ball, how are we going to defend the sun? And so for me, these raise interesting questions, and we have to do this within the next 6 years or less, because you can't put it back in the box. It's already out, and it's increasingly going to create change. That said, I'll leave you with one optimistic note. This is again a photo of us. This was taken in 2013 by Cassini, when NASA's Cassini turned around as it passed Saturn, again of our pale blue dot, our Earth. And Carl Sagan said in 1994, look again at that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known. We're going to need more change agents for the exponential time. Hope you can be one of them, and thank you for your time.